This is the Chewing the Cud podcast, conversations for the dairy industry, produced in the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud podcast. My name's Andrew James and with me as always is
Sarah Bolt.
How you doing, Sarah?
I'm very well, thank you, Andrew. How are you keeping?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm excited because this is the start of year 5.
It's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Where have those 4 years gone for you?
Oh, tell me about it. It's been a lot of work, but it's also been a lot of fun learning as we talk to all of our guests over those last 4 years. So, and I know year 5 is really looking good. So really looking forward to it.
Who have we got lined up?
Yeah, who have we got lined up?
Yeah, not just down to you. Well, you do all the hard work.
We've got some great guests lined up. We've got Matt Dobbs and Ian Lindsay coming to talk about the Stride UK initiative. We've got Stuart Rogers is back again, this time with Rob Pardew from Farm Carbon Toolkit, talking about Carbon Farm of the Year. We've got Kirsty Farnham's going to be talking about choline. Paul Morris is back, going to give us an update on Oxytec because some big things have changed since we last spoke to him. Georgina Thomas and her colleague Juliet Wilms is going to be on about milk powders, updates on milk powders. Matt Goo, from who's current chairman of the British Cattle Breeders Club. Paul Harris is going to be back doing another one. Tom Toll and that's just the ones that are already booked, and most of the others are already in the process of just trying to figure out dates and times and things. So I think, to me, it's going to be an exciting year for the podcast going forward.
I'm really looking forward to talking to them all, and some great topics in there as well.
Yeah, definitely. But I should definitely highlight, though, there are going to be some changes going forward, and that is the fact that the podcast now has some support from the industry, which is fantastic. So thank you very much to those that have agreed to support the podcast. But in terms of the editorial of the podcast, that still comes down pretty much to myself. So it will still remain independent. It will still be down to me. But obviously after 5 years of doing the podcast, it's really good just to get that support to keep the podcast moving forward. Because obviously a lot of time and a lot of work's gone into it to get it to where it is today.
Definitely. But you've had some good, we've got some really good figures, haven't we, as well as to listeners and where we are in the podcast charts, as it were.
Yeah, definitely. I decided to update some figures recently, which I try to do every few months anyway, but dare I say it, I stuck it into AI and asked it just to go, hey, here's the figures. What does it tell you? And it came up with some really good feedback that I'd never even thought about. I just normally concentrate on the 7-day metric because that's what everything's put up against. But it came up with some really good figures talking about how people find us, how people, once they find us, usually stick with us. So thank you very much if you're still with us. How as an independent on a particular chart, we rank 17th in the world for dairy podcasts, and yet we're a small independent one, whereas most of the others are US based and are backed by some big industry body. So yeah, it just keeps showing how much this podcast is growing. So thank you to all our listeners and everybody, whether that's host, co-host, that's me, co-host, guests over the last 4 years and now moving into year 5 have been involved. It's really made it worth it.
It's been fantastic.
Well, thank you. And I guess on that note, it's time we say, let's go listen to the start of year 5. And I hope you enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Chewing the Cud Limited, completely independent, practical nutrition advice for the dairy and beef industries. Whether you need nutrition support, cow signals advice and training, or ROMS accredited mobility scoring, we tailor the advice to your farm and your requirements. For the full range of services, visit www.chewingthecud.com or email nutrition@chewingthecud.com. This episode is also brought to you by Chewing the Cud Limited. We now offer first aid training designed for agriculture and farming, delivered by a registered first aid at work trainer and experienced minor injuries practitioner. For more details, visit www.chewingthecud.com or email training@chewingthecud.com. Hello, I'm Andrew Jones.
And I'm Sarah Bolt.
Sarah's Time Today is kindly brought to you by Kingshay. And together, we bring you the Chewing the Cud podcast, kitchen table conversations for the dairy industry.
Whether you're a farmer, advisor, processor, or anywhere else in the supply chain, we have topics and episodes that will interest you.
We cover the practical and technical aspects of dairy farming.
We want to make you think about what you're doing and ask yourself whether it could be done differently.
Each episode, we speak with specialists from inside and outside the industry about their area of expertise.
Subscribe and listen for free on your favourite podcast platform.
Or sign up at www.chewingthecud.com for episode notifications so you never miss a release.
You'll find links to all our socials there too, including our Instagram, Chewing the Cud Podcast, all one word and no G.
Or get in touch directly at podcast@chewingthecud.com.
If you enjoy what we do, please share it and leave us a review.
Enjoy today's episode. Hello and welcome back. Today we are joined by Vicky Ham. Hello, Vicky.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And Vicky is Technical Services Manager at Ruminant Europe for Arm & Hammer Nutrition. So, let's get it out the way first. Most people know Arm & Hammer as toothpaste.
Well, they do, and actually, when I went to start work for them, they said, "Oh, that's a bit of an odd move, isn't it? Going to work for Arm & Hammer, leaving agriculture." So, yeah, most people don't know that we are actually in the animal nutrition space.
Vicky's here today. Last year, we spoke to Donald Lawson from Premier Nutrition, and we in July 2025, we talked about the transition period, setting cows up for success. And in that, we gave a brief overview of the various different transition methods there were. But seeing the interest we got in that, I thought it'd be good to follow up with that on another one this year. So I asked Vicky to come along and talk about particularly DCAD or DCAB, however you like to prefer it, but also about the transition in general. But before we do, Vicky, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I have been as an on-farm nutritionist for a number of years previously, doing diets across the southwest of England. But I think my nutrition interest really came from being at college and just the science behind it. We're always learning, I think, with nutrition when it comes to cows. And pardon the pun, it's not black and white. It is grey, isn't it? You're always learning. There's always something that comes along and surprises you. And that really stimulated my knowledge. And, I worked for NMR for a bit where we looked at finding new tests from the milk sample, with energy balance and ketosis from the spectral data. And again, that sort of kick-started and reinvigorated my love for nutrition. And then I was able to do it on farm for kite consulting for a number of years before then making the hop, skip and a jump to do similar, but across Europe now. And it's just fascinating seeing the different things that you see across different countries. There's so much to learn. There's so much that's different, but there's also so much that's similar as well, which I think is quite encouraging.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Having obviously farmed elsewhere in the world, as you say, that there are lots of similarities and lots of differences. And in my time when I was talking to, I remember like a Zimbabwean farmer coming and seeing us and things like that. It's all the same but different. Ultimately, cows still got to be milked and fed and take it from there. But so today we're going to talk about the transition period. So let's just, I was going to start by just defining what DCAB actually stands for, because I can never remember, and I'll admit I had to go and look it up this morning. So if you talk DCAB, it is dietary cation anion difference, or some people refer to it as DCAB, dietary cation anion balance.
That's correct.
I think I've got that right.
Yep. It is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
It is a little bit.
It's not a surprise we shorten it.
Well, no, exactly. So at least we've got that bit out of the way.
Yeah, well, unless you're French and then they call it backer, just to confuse things.
Fair enough.
If you've got any French listeners.
We do occasionally. But we've at least got that out of the way, and we'll talk about what it is. But let's talk about transition in general to start with then, Vicky. Why is it so important?
Well, I think we can use the Pareto's principle here, that 80-20 rule. And if we focus 80% of our efforts and work on that, 21-day pre and post calving, then it means the rest of the lactation is really going to go smoothly, because that cow undergoes so much physiological adaptation during that short period of time to set herself up for success or indeed failure, as sometimes occurs.
Well, exactly. So you get it right. And I guess I wanted to talk about DCAB a little bit today, because it's something that, I don't know, what's the word?
Quite specialised.
Well, yeah, I was almost going to say dirty word. That's the wrong word. But
fearful. It can strike.
Yes.
It can strike
yes.
fear. I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably a better word. Fearful, that people maybe have tried it in the past, hasn't been successful. Things have moved on, and I know myself from what I read coming out of stuff from the US, more and more work is showing the benefits, I think, of DCAB maybe compared to other transition systems. So I just wanted to let's have this conversation and see what it can bring.
Yeah, I mean, research kicked off, in the mid-80s by, Dr. Elliot Block, who was with us at Arm & Hammer, is retired now, and if he's listening, I hope you're enjoying a retirement, Elliot. But it's really well researched, a strategy for preventing milk fever out there. There's numerous meta-analyses out there as well to demonstrate that on the day of calving, those cows have better calcium status there as well, and you're able to get better startup milks, peak milks, and lower transition cow diseases in total.
And let's be honest, like you were talking about, the 80-20 rule, most things start in that transition period, whether pre or post, those 21 days. And that's where most disease occurs. And if you can get them successfully through that period, it makes a huge difference for the rest of the lactation.
Yeah, they'll just sing, what's the saying? We want to see a 4-point cow, don't we? We want to see her when we dry her off, when she calves, when we serve her, when we PD her, and then we don't want to see her at all after that. Those are the cows that we want in our herd.
Exactly. So would you like to just explain to people the basics of what DCAB actually are?
Okay.
So I'll just flip between both, so sorry.
No, it's fine. Either one. But small chemistry lesson then coming up. So cations are positive, anions are negative charge. So we have sodium and potassium being the positive cations, and the negative anions being chloride and sulfur. So when we want to feed for a diet of a certain DCAB level, we need to balance those. During the transition period, we want at that negative DCAB, so we want to feed more anions. So we provide supplements with chloride or sulfur in order to reduce that dietary DCAB value. And you've got products that are there at various different sources. So DCAB sort of measured in something called milliequivalents, which is the strength of, it's a combination actually of the strength of that electrical charge and also then the molecular weight, which is why we get some of these like different strength products, like ammonium chloride would be the strongest, for example. And then you've got other ones, or the most common one out there would be magnesium chloride, slightly lower strength than ammonium chloride. And sulfates as well, which would be perhaps a little bit lower again.
The biggest problem in that regard, though, isn't it, for those products, is their palatability
becomes a factor as well, doesn't it?
And I think this is, your point earlier about DCAB diet striking fear in certain people is because of that palatability issue. And years ago when they might have tried it, and, our whole knowledge about transition cow diets isn't what it was today. We probably had poorly struck straw, that was there. And so we weren't getting uniformity of intakes. And, that they are, pretty impalatable, so they need to be disguised somehow or mixed in well, and if you just put some of them on top, or if it's poorly mixed, they're going to sort it and they're not going to eat it in total. And that's where years ago, where we would have gone for perhaps very strong negative DCAB diets, they would have had an impact on dry matter intake.
Yeah, as you say, and things have definitely changed, haven't they? So, and I suppose the thing as well is when we're doing it, like you say, we want to feed those negatives. We don't want to feed too much positives, and that can be the downside. Maybe of, I personally prefer to keep some of all the forages they're going to have milking in their diet because it gets the rumen flora and fauna right. But the downside of that is potentially grass silage is adding potassium, which can then upset the whole DCAB balance, isn't it?
Exactly, because you're adding in more of those positive cations there, which just means you're going to have to feed more negative anions. So you're going to have to add in more magnesium chloride or whatever you use in order to get that diet negative enough to elicit that urine pH, so you get those benefits in there.
So you've just touched on silage being naturally positive. Are there any forages that are more suitable for that DCAB diet?
Anything that probably hasn't had much fertilizer or manure applied in it will help. Whole crop again is another good crop that would be naturally lower in potassium than some of the grass-based forages in there. And I'll also sort of flip your question there, Sarah, to say, okay, which ones are also not suitable? And I think, with some of these newer like conservation schemes that we're seeing, I've had cases where people have looked at some of those multi-sword lays that have bolted and gone, oh, that looks really fibrous and that will be an ideal dry cow feed. And of course, they fed it and just had a number of disasters because those legumes that are in there have quite an unusual mineral profile. So I would definitely steer clear of any of those sort of like conservation lays for negative dry cow diets.
We learned a little bit about unusual minerals, didn't we, in the podcast live event we did on herbal lays, and that was one of the topics came out was like, what minerals do these bring? And some of them do bring some different minerals to the party.
Certainly, and I guess that's the advantage of actually analysing forages for mineral balance.
So yes, you talk about analysing forages, and we mustn't forget to analyse the straw in there as well. People think that straw doesn't vary too much in their mineral content, but actually when we have drought years, for example, that plant is searching for water. While it does that, it can uptake quite a bit more nutrients. And one of the consequences is actually higher potassium levels. And I've seen this, several years, certainly in the south of England as well, where straw has this slight pink tinge to it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And, it's all familiar now. And that is higher potassium. And, book values for wheat straw are going to be somewhere around like 0.3, 0.4%. You might get up to 0.6%. Now, I've tested some straw samples that were pink in colour during the drought years, and I've had potassium levels come back at 2%.
Wow, big difference.
A huge difference.
Big difference.
And if you're feeding a diet that's got 4, 5, 6 kilos of straw in, already that's going to upset your DCAB value. So, yes, so you're absolutely right in that we do want to test our forages and all of our forages, including straw. But I can guess what you're going to ask me next, or at least make the comment, because I know Donald mentioned this on your other podcast, was about not doing, how would you do a DCAB diet if you haven't got mineral analysis, and not everybody does. And I think that's where urine pH testing can be really, really beneficial in those circumstances.
I mean, yeah, you're saying that I would massively. Usually maize is maize, and like you say, whole crop's similar. But for grass, I would advocate. I'll be honest, I hadn't thought of straw having that much variation in it. I'll be honest. But certainly grass, I would advocate every year, if whatever you're feeding to your transition cows needs a mineral analysis.
Yeah, I would certainly say that, even if you're not doing a DCAB diet, still mineral test your forages so that you can reformulate your mineral anyway, so that we're not overfeeding or underfeeding from that point of view.
And the cost isn't that much, to be honest with you, at the moment.
It's minimal, isn't it?
It is. I mean, at the moment, it would be 25 quid to do a forage analysis, and that would be
It's about double that for a...
And then 60 quid to do it with a mineral analysis as well. So really, for 60 quid, you could save yourself a hell of a lot of time and bother.
Yeah. And in milking cow rations as well, the money that you could save there, like I say, if you put the dry cow DCAB diets to one side, even in your milking rations, you're just reformulating your mineral analysis. Exactly. Would be beneficial.
Exactly. But yeah, no, but say I'm certainly, you may disagree, but I'm certainly an advocate. I like to try and have all the forages I'm going to feed in my milking ration in my transition ration to try and what's the word I'm looking for? Like I say, get the rumen flora and fauna ready to go with those forages. But as you say, it's a bit of an irony that the industry has been telling farmers to make better quality silage, which we need for the milking cow, but actually for your transition cow, you probably want some older, stalkier, poorer quality silages, isn't it?
Yeah, and you could just set a field aside. If you know how many, roughly how many dry cows you're going to have through the year, you can make a certain clamp or a layer in a clamp, or even have some bales available. If you just set that field aside so you have a much lower application of slurry to it compared to what you do elsewhere, then you're going to be starting off from a much safer level in order to get some of that forage into the cow pre-lactation diet.
And you mentioned whole crop. You didn't mention maize, but that's also usually a good one as well, isn't it? In terms
of low level of minerals in there, and the majority of dry cow diets that I would have done will have been maize based. It's simple, it's easy. Most dairy farms these days have maize, although a number of the farms that I would visit across Europe don't always. Certain areas don't have maize, and they would be grass based diets over there as well. Still able to do DCAB successfully.
Okay. So you mentioned, we mentioned roughly what they are, but what are the benefits then, say, of a DCAB diet over maybe some of the other options out there? I mean, I guess the obvious one is partial DCAB, but also you've got binders, you've got all sorts of things.
I was waiting for you to say that phrase,
what,
Sandro.
Partial
DCAB, because, okay, if it's one thing I want people to go away from listening to this podcast today, is that there is no such thing as a partial DCAB, okay? You are either acidified or you are not, and that's it, okay? And again, this comes back to my earlier point about urine pH testing, is that as soon as we've got that cow to a urine pH around, anywhere between 6.2 and 6.8, that cow is acidified, and you will have the benefits of switching on a number of mechanisms within that cow, okay? So you will have increased responsiveness to something called parathyroid hormone, which switches on the proteins and the enzymes that convert vitamin D into its active form. It helps to reabsorb more calcium through the gut lining as well. And also it switches on the bones to be more, to get more calcium resorption from the bones. Okay, so, but that happens once we've got that cow into that acidified state.
Other benefits?
Well, I suppose you're right. That's the mode of action. That's how it works. But benefits in terms of the cow performance that we'll see is we will, as I started off by saying, that we'll have better calcium stasis at calving. So we principally feed a DCAB diet to try and prevent milk fever. So we'd see reduction in clinical cases, but also subclinical, because we know that for every clinical case that we see, it's like an iceberg disease. There's going to be more subclinicals lurking there than we realise. But we're also going to have an impact on other transition cow diseases as well. things like ketosis, metritis, mastitis, any of those like inflammatory diseases, we're going to have a benefit with, because calcium is involved in all of those to a certain degree because of the interaction between calcium and the immune system through inflammation.
There's some newer work on inflammation as well, isn't there?
Yeah, the latest thinking is that actually hypercalcemia, milk fever, isn't necessarily a deficiency of calcium, but an effect of, or the occurrence of, an activated immune system that thus requires calcium. So you get into this self-perpetuating cycle that we've got inflammation in the cow, which requires calcium, which causes the cow to go into hypercalcemia, which then causes a more inflamed immune system, which then requires, and it goes round and round and round, and we get into this vicious circle. But we're not quite at the stage that we really understand why that calcium is needed for the immune system. We know that it blocks the activity of that parathyroid hormone, so it's going to then almost prevent the benefits that we see from like those DCAB diets, which is where, I think where we move to and where we need to start considering it as part of our dry cow strategies is how we handle inflammation in that key stressful period, because in all dairy systems we're going to put cows through stressors that we can't avoid: calving, drying off. If we look at calves, weaning, dehorning, they're all unavoidable stressors that these animals go through, that we need a way to manage inflammation in order to make sure that when that cow does have inflammation, that doesn't become systemic.
The terminology sort of inflammation, I don't think that we've really sort of talked very much about that in, certainly I've been in the industry 30 something years, and we've only it's only really come across my plate in the last maybe 5. And then we start hearing of things about leaky gut and all of these things that all seem to be related to inflammation. We hear about it more from a human point of view and everything else. And it's something that I'd really like to explore a little bit more, that I feel that I don't know and understand enough about.
I think we've had a lot of focus on like adaptive immunity. So vaccines, for example, like we give a vaccine, we get an adaptive immune response. But actually 95% of all infectious challenges are resolved by the innate immune system. Okay. And the cow you don't actually have to see clinical signs for that cow to have inflammation. I think there was a study done by some Italian researchers that showed nearly 60% of all cows at calving had inflammation with 0 clinical signs, none. And if we have inflammation, what we know is that is going to require glucose. And glucose, I think, again, another piece of work, I can't remember who it's from, demonstrated that an activated immune system requires 1 kilo of glucose every 12 hours.
I was going to say that's the one thing I've heard before. Is it Hugh McGonaghy? I've heard talk about it. The fact that if you've got any sort of inflammation or disease, it's the requirement of glucose suddenly goes up, and that's where your energy gets taken, is there, rather than milk production.
Exactly. The systems that are going to want that glucose instead, like reproduction, they are going to lose out to the immune system, because that's the cow's protective mechanisms kicking in order for it to survive.
That takes the energy first.
It does. Yeah, it gets first dibs.
So sort of, you just mentioned that increase in yields. Thinking about that increase in yields and negative energy balance, is there any impact on of DCAB on negative energy balance?
There have certainly been studies, and we've seen in some of the trials that we've conducted, that BHB, so beta-hydroxybutyrate levels, are lower in cows that have been fed a negative DCAB diet compared to control diets out there as well. And again, I think that actually comes back to some of this inflammation that we've just touched on as well, in that's also involved in reducing those transition cow diseases.
And I guess if they haven't got, they don't need that energy for the immune system, they've got it then to put into milk, etc. So actually that negative energy balance won't be so great anyway.
Quite. And studies showing, similar, no difference in body condition scores out there either, or degree of body weight loss comparisons. So, and actually the meta-analyses from Santos that I mentioned earlier, they actually showed that cows fed that negative DCAB diet actually ate 1 kilo more dry matter intake after calving. And if there's that's thing
significant.
Exactly. If there's one thing that we all need to prioritize, it is dry matter intakes, because if cows don't eat, then again we get this vicious circle in less nutrients, leaky gut syndrome, which then kickstarts the inflammation circle, and so on and so forth.
LDAs and
LDAs, LDAs are a classic sign that something has gone wrong somewhere in the transition cow disease. On Donald's podcast, he really emphasized that Riemann fill scores are so important when it comes to managing that transition cow, and I couldn't agree more. It's so simple, it's so quick and easy to do, and a really visual tool to prevent something happening further down the line.
Well, and I recently shared something with you that I'd stumbled across only recently. It's possibly, we're talking about energy, and I'm not saying DCAB's the right, but you're showing that it has benefits. If we get the transition right, it's affecting the offspring as well, isn't it?
And I think this is a relatively new area that we're only just starting to explore, is how the nutrition of the dam in late gestation has an impact on that calf in later life. And, the whole field of epigenetics is just fascinating. It
completely.
Really interests me.
I was going to say, we've got to remember that it's not just if it's a heifer calf, actually that's an impacting the next generation as well, because obviously that heifer calf's going to be born with all of her eggs, etc. So actually, you start thinking about it from that point of view, that you're impacting the next 2 generations, not just
exactly. And there's studies out there that show that if that dam goes through heat stress during that period, then that has a negative impact on that calf and the heifers and the calf of her calves. In longer life as well. And I think the research that you shared, Andrew, was about higher BHBs and rumen development in those calves. So not being able to potentially take up the volume of nutrients that they need. Again, all consequences that are going to hinder us from hitting that calving at 24 months for a heifer target
and achieving their potential, basically.
Yeah, I mean, lost genetic potential, I think, is probably one of the biggest financial losses all dairy farmers have to contend with.
Yeah, I would argue there's plenty of times where the management doesn't keep up with the genetic potential.
And we have gone through so many genetic advances in the last number of years as well. With genomics, with some of the indexes out there, even sex semen, all of that has really reduced our generation interval. And now we've got some of these almost like racehorse cows that we need to improve our management and nutrition of in order to feed them to their genetic potential. And a large part of that does start in the dry period.
It does. I mean, as I say, I've probably already mentioned it, most things start in that. If we can get it right in that period, it makes a huge amount of difference. I mean, I know with the cow signals, they concentrate very much on that dry to fresh, as they call it, period, that transition period. And if we get it right there, that's probably 80% of the diseases taken care of then and there, sort of thing.
And not just diseases, but also reproduction as well. So we're going to get cows cycling normal. We want all of the cows to be cycling before 35 to 42 days in milk. They want to be served by, 70, 80 days. We want to have, a low proportion of those cows not served by 100 days, because as soon as we get those extended lactations, this is where we get problems. Those cows become fat. Fat cows have way more problems than thin cows, contrary to what you might think, because they actually suppress their appetite, and then we get ketosis. And again, we have another vicious circle that goes round and round and round.
Well, I mentioned it, I think, in the podcast with Donald. I looked at transition diet, it must be 18 months ago now. And he showed me the bit of paper, and the first comment I said is, you must get a lot of ketotic cows. He said, how do you know that? I said, because you're feeding a milking cow ration in terms of energy. For anyone that's not listening, transition diet, you're looking at what, 120, 140 ME maybe?
Somewhere in between there.
Somewhere around there. They were feeding 220. Yeah. And so all it's doing is making fat cows. And then when it comes to it, while you're trying to go, we want them to eat as much as possible, actually, the quickest and easiest way for them to get energy is not to eat it, is to take it off their back. So they end up in this cycle, and you end up with a lot of ketotic cows, and it just keeps going.
It does. Another vicious cycle, as you say.
It is. So, DCAB, we've sort of spoken about some of the benefits practically, because how do we do it? People, I suppose, also, if we said fearful earlier, they have to run around with urine strips. I know there's the trick that the vet often used to use. I had in North Queensland, but I can never make a cow pee by tickling it in the right place. Now that sounds a bit dodgy, sorry. But do people need to run around with urine strips? How do they implement it on farm? Yeah, let's start at the beginning. How do we make this work on farm? We talk about get your forage analysed. What other key markers would you look for when you're putting together a transition diet?
Also consider the protein sources that you're feeding, because they will have a different DCAB value as well. So something like rapeseed meal, that would be like minus 200 milliequivalents, or soya would be like plus 325. Now, a lot of people would consider soya to be a superior protein for dry cows because it has a large proportion of bypass protein, but it does have a high DCAB value. So I would prefer to see DCAB diets with rapeseed, and I've fed negative DCAB diets very successfully on a very simple ration of maize, straw, rapeseed, and then your mineral and anionic supplement.
Easy.
Yeah, when we say it like that, it does sound quite easy. Well, I don't know what all the fuss is about, Andrew. Just chuck it in and away we go.
But it does sometimes just need to be easy. I mean, yeah, as I say, I prefer to put the different forages, but me personally, it is, let's say it's grass, maize, for argument's sake, straw, whatever your protein source is. And then, as you say, that's it. It doesn't need to be much else.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't need to be complicated. And I don't know whether it's the industry's fault for making it sound more complicated, because we talk about positives and negatives and urine pH testing. But if we've got a consistent forage source and we've got a consistent diet, we've got a consistent number of cows, that diet can be the same pretty much all year round. So yes, it is good to urine pH test to check that we're at the right level, because we can adjust that diet if we aren't, which means that we might be able to feed less of the supplement in order to achieve that urine pH level, or we might need to feed more just to check that we're at that right level. Because when I berated you earlier for saying partial DCAB, okay, my point there was that the only way that we know whether we're in the right space is by doing that urine pH, and it will be different for all herds because of their forages. But things like breed, for example, also make a difference. So with Jersey cows, we actually want to be slightly lower because they're funny creatures. Jerseys, beautiful cows, absolute characters. But when it comes to minerals, slightly unique. So we want to actually be a little bit lower in their mineral, in their urine pH level. So you want to be anywhere between like 5.6 and 6.2. Whereas your Holsteins will be, again, 6.2 to 6.8. Okay. But yeah, it doesn't need to be complicated. But it does need to be consistent.
Well, I was going to say we've talked about straw, and one thing we haven't mentioned regarding straw, and you're talking about consistency, it needs to be consistently chopped to the right length, doesn't it? Because if you just go put a bale of straw in the feed wagon and think that'll do it, it won't. They will sort it. They won't eat it. Ideally, a tub grinder, but it wants to be 1.5, 2 inches in length, and I've seen them quite happily eat 6 kilos.
Yeah, they will if it's chopped well. I mean, 30 mil. I work in metric. Sorry.
Sorry.
I should really know the conversions quicker, having working with my American colleagues. But 30 mil, absolutely fine. And if you've got
inch and a quarter, then
there we go. And if you've got that, if you've got the machine coming on farm to chop straw for the dry cows, then you've also got it there to chop straw for the calves as well.
Yes, exactly. And farms that we've then gone and put the chopped straw into the calves, because it was already there for the dry cows. What a difference that makes. What a difference. So exactly, good point. Definitely. But then practically, we've got the mix. We're making sure it's consistent. It's fed daily. Make sure there's enough feed space, because I've seen that as a problem before. Should people be running around to check their, what level of, I can never think of what the unit is. You keep saying it. I just think of negative 200 or whatever it is. What levels do you aim for on a diet for your DCAB?
You can be anywhere from minus 50 milliequivalents per kilo of dry matter all the way up to minus 150 milliequivalents per kilo of dry matter. Because, again, as long as you've got into that acidification, then you're achieving your goal. On some farms, you might need to go stronger. On some farms, you might be okay with minus 50. And again, I have fed diets with that complete range. Now, Arm & Hammer's recommendation would be anywhere from minus 80 to minus 120. But on the continent, I would come across some of these single dry cow groups, and they would just get it just below negative. They might be neutral or just like minus 10, and they're still able to see benefits.
Because they're in one group rather than two.
Yes, and if you are feeding a single dry cow group, then I would recommend going milder on your negative DCAD. So again, between that 0 and minus 50, minus 60, if you're feeding it for 45 days. And arguably, it is actually probably the only strategy for single dry cow groups is a negative DCAD, which you can safely feed for 42, 45 days.
For the whole period.
For the whole period. But if we do only have one dry cow group, then I would advocate a shorter dry period length. I don't want to see a single group with 60 days. And the reason for that is that cow will put on too much weight, and then we'll get fat cows, and then that cycle starts.
Exactly, calving difficulties, etc., etc.
Exactly, malpresentations of the calf, all of that stuff will happen because that cow has eaten too much while she's not been producing.
And so therefore, how frequently would you recommend people running around with urine strips?
When you've made a diet change, it's going to take that cow probably 3 to 5 days to really sort of settle in or to get that acidification that you're aiming for. So after 5 days, then I would be sampling to check that you're hitting where you want to be. And then once you've got those cows settled, if we're on a consistent diet, once a fortnight will be absolutely fine. Okay, you don't need to go in there daily. You can go in there weekly if you've got a lot of things that are going on. You've got a number of layers in the clamp. You've got a number of diet changes that are going on. You've got a number of group changes that are going on, pen moves, this, that, and the other. Then those cows themselves are going to be probably quite upset when it comes to their dry matter intakes. And there's probably more than something else going on there that you need to check. But you can successfully run a DCAD diet with testing, once a fortnight or even once a month if you're confident that that diet is consistent. And do you know what? I will hold my hand up at this point and I will say that I have fed negative DCAD diets and I haven't urine pH tested once. Okay, that's I confess. This is confessions. Okay. But we didn't have any problems, and it's easy to say that, if you haven't got any problems, why do we do? And you can go along that. But as soon as something happens, you think, oh, I wish I'd have known this sooner. And I think this is where we need to change the way we think about urine pH testing, is that it's quick, it's cheap, and I was going to say it's easy to do, but based on your comment earlier, maybe not all the time.
Well, I don't know. I just used to have a vet in North Queensland that when he wanted to do a urine test, he'd just give him a little tickle. He could make him pee every time. I have tried it. Can I make it happen? No.
What sort of percentage of dry cows do we need to be testing?
I'd aim for, if you've got a pen, you don't want to test anything that's just been moved into the pen. You don't want to test anything that's you think is going to calve in the next 3 or 4 days, because again, their dry matter intakes is going to be slightly off. But if you were to test a sample of cows in that pen and you got 80% of those in your target range, then I'd be absolutely happy. If we're getting higher to higher pHs, so normal cow urine pH is going to be 8. If you're only achieving, in the low 7s, that's not enough. Okay, you must definitely be below 7. Okay, and ideally below 6.8. But then again, if you're down at like 5.5 or even lower, then you are acidifying that diet way too much, and you need to pull out some of that supplement in order to raise that urine pH. Because as soon as we get down to that low urine pH level, there will be an impact on dry matter intakes, and that has been shown in the research. So you talked earlier, Andrew, about being fearful of feeding too much salts and impacting on dry matter intakes. That's why we don't need to go to these extreme depths that we might have thought of 15, 20 years ago in order to get the benefits.
Which is maybe where people went.
I think so.
And saw it not work. Like all these things, give it a bit of time, refine the answers, and it suddenly worked. No different, I suppose, when I went to Oz, too many years ago now. Don't want to go anywhere near a rotary because people had rotaries here. They'd been the metal ones, they'd rusted out, blah, blah, blah. Whereas they persisted with them in Oz and New Zealand. And everybody, well, not everybody, but you know what I mean? It was standard to have a rotary. And now you see more rotaries come back into this country because the technology's being developed over there and is being used here. So it's a similar sort of situation, isn't it?
Yes. And the one caveat I will say is that negative DCAB diets do work slightly differently for heifers. But we know that heifers don't suffer from milk fever. So they aren't necessarily our target here when we're trying to prevent milk fevers. But research has shown that actually heifers are okay and won't suffer any negative impact from being on a negative DCAB diet, but again, at a milder level. So for heifers, you're looking like minus 50 milliequivalents per kilo of dry matter, minus 60. Again, any stronger and you will impact on those heifers as well.
So ideally, you're talking a separate heifer group.
Well, if we were to live in an ideal world, Andrew, yes, we'd have a separate dry cow or transition group for our heifers, for our multi-paras cows, and then in the fresh as well. But who has that many pens available?
Well, exactly.
But we can dream, can't we?
I did say ideal.
I know. One day, I'm sure we will see it, and I'm sure there's some large farms over in the US that do exactly that will have separate.
Well, exactly. It comes down to numbers, doesn't it? If you've got the numbers, it's easy to have a separate pen for things like that.
It is, and that's why most of the farms that I would see across Europe, they're 50 or 60 cows, and they operate on that single dry cow group.
Yeah. So what about post-calving? I mean, ideally straight off that and onto the milking cow diet. But what about, for argument's sake, calcium? I mean, I've certainly heard some people, I've heard it's even higher in the States, feeding limestone flour literally on top of the milking cow diet to get that calcium into those cows as quickly as possible.
Yeah, well, they go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in such a short space of time, and calcium requirements obviously increase drastically over that period. I mean, cows will lose it doesn't sound like a lot, 23 grams of calcium in 10 litres of colostrum, but normal circulating calcium that's available to them is only 10 grams. So they have that gap already in there. So they need to be able to extract that calcium from the diet quickly, and that's where those mechanisms that are turned on from negative DCAD diet and being in that acidified state will help. But yes, you do definitely need to be feeding calcium in your fresh cow diet and also in your transition cow diet. I am in the camp that, yes, you do need to feed calcium alongside negative DCAD diets.
Yeah.
Some people do, some people don't. I think there is a benefit, and I would advocate feeding it.
I've definitely done it, and I know the farmers are a little bit dubious of it because they'd done it in the past. But I can't remember what the reason was now, but we worked out why it hadn't worked in the past. We did it then at that point, and you'll hate me, but it was a partial DCAB diet. In what people traditionally think of one as in putting the mag chloride in flakes into the mix. But it worked, and it worked successfully. And they were like, oh, okay, it does work if it's like all these things, if it's done properly. And as I say, I've definitely, now what was it? Someone told me, is it somebody feeding, was it 1 or 1.5% calcium as soon as they calved on top of the milking ration? And being told, was it in the States they were feeding sort of 2.5%?
Yeah.
They're feeding even higher levels.
Yeah. And
there were benefits for doing this.
Yeah. There is two schools of thought there. Certainly pre-calving, you're looking at like a low calcium, which I would avoid, because if we're excreting the calcium, we've turned on those mechanisms, but the cow's not yet needing it, then we need to replace it, okay? And that's where feeding a higher level. So I'd be around that 1% as a minimum in there. And if we do need to go on a stronger negative DCAD side, then I would vote you also go like stronger on the calcium. I mean, as a really rough and crude broad rule of thumb, if you're at minus 150 milliequivalents, then I would go 1.5%. If you're minus 120, I go 1.2%. That sort of thing. But again, I have fed diets with calcium levels, 1.8% in there, and again, been absolutely fine. And the same in in that fresh period, in order to again, meet the needs of that early lactation cow, because they're going to be in negative calcium balance probably for 6 to 8 weeks. And I think Jesse Goff's research, for the 90s demonstrated that.
So just for clarification, that you've got your negative, so whether that's 50, 80, and then you then add your calcium afterwards. So aren't including that calcium in that minus 50 or minus 80?
No, it won't go into it won't impact the negative DCAD calculation as such. But so if you're feeding a diet that's below 100 minus 100 milliequivalents, then I would say be at that 1% calcium. As soon as you go for a stronger negative DCAD, like 120, 150, then I'd be increasing your level of calcium almost to match.
I will actually support you with your comment on, I remember someone years ago saying there's no such thing as a partial DCAB. You either are or aren't. And I know we all still call it a partial, because it's
habit, isn't it?
It's habit, and that's what people in their heads it is. And so you go, it's a partial DCAB. But I know someone else said to me, no, there's no such thing. It is, you either are or aren't. It's you're messing around, stop messing around and do one or the other.
Exactly. And to your point about, post-calving and a calcium in, when things go wrong with negative DCAD, it's because I see people, they will put the cow, they'll leave the cow in that dry cow pen after she's calved, so she's still got access to that negative DCAD diet. As soon as that cow's calved, she has no need to be in that acidified status, okay? So she absolutely needs to stop. It needs to be a completely separate pen.
She wants a positive DCAD diet,
she does, absolutely. So it needs to be completely separate. And I see... on farm, the pen for those calf cows is literally right next door. So the cow's still got access to that negative DCAD diet, and the fresh cow diet might just be bought in wheelbarrows. So she's not got any of that fresh. So she gets the fresh diet that's next door. That's a classic example, and that's not going to have enough calcium in it now that she's producing colostrum and producing milk and starting lactation.
It's also, I was just thinking as we were talking here, I've come across a farm before that I said, "Oh, you're feeding the DCAB diet," and they went, "No, we're not. You've got, I think it was ammonium chloride or something like, whatever it was something like that." And they're like, "You're feeding it?" Yeah. That's what our feed guide tells us to feed, but you're feeding the DCAB diet. No, we're not. I suppose it's understanding what you are or aren't feeding.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's people out there that maybe don't question their trade nutritionist or nutrition enough to understand, why they're doing what they're doing and the importance of getting it right or the importance of getting it wrong. Because I would have had exactly similar circumstances, albeit slightly different, in that I'd go on farm and they'd say, "Oh yeah, I'm feeding DCAB diet. Okay, well let's have a look at it." And they were adding in 50 grams of magnesium chloride. It's not strong enough. And actually what they were doing, or why they weren't seeing any clinical milk fevers, was because they actually had a low calcium level in the diet. They weren't providing any minerals, vitamins, limestone whatsoever to those dry cows. So they were actually, getting some of the benefits from not providing any calcium whatsoever.
We talked about forages and we talked about protein sources. It just made me think about other good feed sources. Off the top of my head, if I remember right, likes of brewers' grains and that are also good for this, aren't they?
And they are, because they've got low potash values. The challenge is storing them well so they don't get mouldy, because they can be a source of mycotoxins. And again, mycotoxins in your transitional frescoes is not a good thing to be feeding. And also availability and consistency. I mentioned earlier about, DCAB diets aren't complicated, but they do need to be consistent. And brewers' grains is one of those feedstuffs that doesn't always end up being consistent, either through dry matter, quality, availability in there. But yeah, they are a great feedstuff for dry cows. You've just got to be able to get them and get them regularly in order to manage it.
Any other feedstuffs you particularly like? Obviously, rape, you said.
Yeah, I do like rape. So, well, it was one of the cheaper protein sources, but soya has come back. It's probably a little bit more comparable on a crude protein percentage these days.
I did one literally last week, and soya was £1 a unit cheaper on crude protein compared to rape.
Yeah, there we go.
And admittedly, that's for a beef diet, but we were if you looked at per unit protein, soya worked out cheaper.
Yeah, I think when it comes to protein, the source will make a difference, but as long as we hit that 12 to 1,300 grams of metabolizable protein in those dry cows, that's the key thing. And depending on some of the diets that you might be feeding, it can be quite tough to achieve that level. If we're sticking in a lot of minerals in there that aren't providing additional nutrients as well, then it could be quite a tough challenge to hit that target. Because Sarah, you mentioned negative energy balance. I've mentioned negative calcium balance. Well, negative protein balance is just as important in there as well. Cows will lose protein, muscle function, and that in itself will kickstart that inflammation cycle. And guess what? Then we'll start and we'll be in a vicious circle again. There's a theme developing here, isn't there?
It does seem like it, doesn't it? That it just shows, and we've talked about impact just not on the cow, but also its offspring and potentially its offspring's offspring. It just shows how important it is to get this right.
Yeah, if you're going to invest anywhere in your production cycle, this is the place to do it. Okay?
And we're not just... Yes, we're talking the nutritional side of things, but it's also making sure they've got space to eat, space to drink, space to lie. The light. Going to put my cow signals hat on a minute, but all of those things as well are massively important.
Treat them like princesses, not in the dark, dingy corner of the shed.
Yeah, you beat me to it, Sarah. That's exactly what I was going to say. And I think we have come a long way over the last 20, 30 years in the conditions that we put our dry cows in. Because they weren't, producing animals, they were almost forgotten about, and thankfully that isn't the case today. And they are given better environments, better conditions, but still we see some of these transition cow diseases, occur. So there's always improvements that that can be done. And you mentioned, stocking rates. I mean, I think that's a biggie, and I think that's in a drive to manage our margins these days, and herds getting bigger. Stocking densities in dry cow pens is the one place that it really comes under pressure, and that pen doesn't need to be 100% stocked to be overstocked. That pen wants to be 80%, 85% stocked, and that's full.
I was going to say, you start working out the actual measurements. I can never remember them off the top of my head. I want to say, is it 7.5 square meters?
I think it's
10.
And then plus, plus a litre for every, plus a metre squared for every
a metre squared for every 1,000.
litres.
Yeah, for every 1,000. So a 14,000 litre Holstein cow is going to want 14 metres squared of line space.
The one off the top of my head is usually talk 10 as a minimum what it should be. So yeah, exactly. It just shows how much you do see them. It is unfortunately that is the what's the word I'm looking for? That the pinch point, as you say, is usually at that point.
Yes, because that is the only group where the cow decides when she moves out.
Yeah.
Every other group, you as the herdsperson, manager, decides when she leaves that group, but not in that transition cow, not in that dry cow pen. It's her decision when she leaves, and that's why we see it as a bottleneck.
It shows how important getting all of this right is. But looking at the time, Vicky, we could keep going with this conversation, I know for sure, but it's time we start wrapping this up. So any last words of wisdom from yourself?
Just to say that negative DCAB diets don't need to be complicated. They need to be consistent, and they are absolutely the most researched and most beneficial to postpartum cow production and health strategy out there that we have available to us.
And not be afraid of them here in the UK, which it seems I think we've become a little bit. Sarah?
Well, I came into this conversation probably knowing very little about DCAB diets, probably just something that I've never, not a nutritionist. I'm aware that they exist, but don't really know much about them, and have again been perhaps put off by some of the previous experience of some farmers. But I think the message that I've got today is that actually it can be simple, it can be easy to do, and the benefits totally outweigh any negatives that might be seen in change or anything else. So yeah, I'm really, if it was down to me, I'd give it a go.
I'm glad I've convinced you, Sarah.
Well, I was going to say that's kind of what I was going to go with. If you're saying that's I'd say that's a positive, because I suppose that was the whole point why I wanted this conversation with Vicky was DCABs. I will say is still looked at by some people as a dirty word, and whether it's because they're fearful or whatever, for whatever reason, and people have this image of running around with urine sticks and all of these sorts of things. Whereas actually, like you say, the research is showing more and more and more that it's the most beneficial system out there. I'm not saying there isn't a place for the other systems, as we ran through pretty much all of them last year with Donald. But this is the one that is showing that there are the most benefits from. So let's have this conversation. Let's get people talking about it. Let's be thinking about it. So, and as I say, I think there are probably people out there who are doing a DCAB and don't even realize they're doing a DCAB diet. But otherwise, no, I'd like to thank Vicky very much for her time. It's been fantastic, been a great conversation. But otherwise, I guess it's a goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from them.
Thank you.
Arm & Hammer Animal Nutrition are pleased to support Chewing the Cud podcast. We're all in when it comes to supporting healthy, productive farm animals. Please visit ahanimalnutrition.com for more information.
Thank you for listening to the Tune the Cud podcast, where we bring you conversations for the dairy industry produced in the southwest of England and listened to around the world. And now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. Information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses or products during the podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Limited, and the views of Sarah Bolt are personal and may not be the views of Kingshay Farming and Conservation Limited and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast and details of services offered by Chewing the Cud Limited, visit www.chewingthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.